Mr. Rushdie, yes, you're back, you're reading, you're giving interviews, you're getting an award, but has anything changed? Is this the Salman Rushdie we used to know, we used to read?
I think yes. I mean, broadly speaking, yes. I think people who know me would say that I'm still the same person. I mean, of course there are changes, you know, because an event as significant as this in a human life leaves a mark. I mean, certainly physically I'm different because I'm not as strong as I used to be. You know, there's a physical difference. And I mean, psychologically, I think I've more or less worked through the trauma.
Also by writing a book?
Well, yeah, I think the book has helped in a way because not exactly as therapy, but more as a way of regaining the control of the narrative, you know, becoming once again the person telling the story and not just the victim. I never liked the position of victim, you know. I prefer to be a protagonist.
You're a novelist, not a victim, that's for sure. Now, you got the Bruno Kreisky Award. You met Bruno Kreisky, as we heard, and it's certainly not your first Austrian experience. You got the European Literature Prize in 1994, and you were aware of what's going on in Austria. You named the Heldenplatz, for example. Are you still paying attention to the political development in Austria?
I mean, a little bit. And I remember that you mentioned the event at the Heldenplatz. I remember how important that felt, you know, to combat the rise of the right wing. And what I remember about it was that it was very, very bad weather. It was raining very heavily. And I remember thinking, if the rain puts people off and they don't come, then that will look bad, you know. But instead, the Heldenplatz was absolutely full of people who were soaked to the skin, but who were determined to be there in order to make the point, you know. And it felt very moving to be a part of that event.
Right. The weather is still there, changing. The right movement is still there, even growing. Are you afraid of right-wing developments throughout Europe and also in Austria?
Well, throughout the world, you know. I mean, I think the United States is going through its own form of right-wing renaissance, if you like. You know, yeah, it's alarming, you know, but I hope it can begin to change. You know, politics, like everything else, has fashions, and it may be that the fashion for people like Trump is fading.
Fading, even though he's a presidential candidate. He wants a second term.
He does. Wanting it is one thing, getting it is another.
You said that he's not going to get the second term. Why?
I'm a very bad prophet, by the way. You know, I thought he would lose to Hillary Clinton. So don't trust me. But I think there are reasons to believe that he may not find it easy. I mean, for a start, the ordinary political reasons, which is that the economy is actually in very good shape, and you know, unemployment is lower than it's been for half a century, and inflation is coming down, and all these ordinary political measures, you know. But then there are extraordinary things. For example, that he might be in jail. That would be helpful, and quite possible, you know, at this point. And also, I think,
the former prostitute.
Because of the Stormy Daniels saga, yes. Not because he had sex with a porn star, but because he covered it up in order to affect the outcome of a presidential election. So it becomes election interference. I mean, that's the charge. And I think it's quite a strong case, you know, so we'll see. But also, I think the vote of women will be very significant in this election because of the anger about the abortion ruling. And I think that's making an enormous number of women, including women who previously might have voted Republican, rethink. You know? And I think if there's a swing in the women's vote, then really he can't win.
So if you had written a character like Trump, your editor would have said, no, that's not convincing.
Yeah.
This is an exaggerated figure. and still it's there since a long time, actually. How is it possible in a democracy like the United States?
You know, we're in an age when people like cartoons. And now you have and also they like reality TV stars. And that's where he came from. He came out of reality television. You know? And it's the kind of tragedy of America that such an individual could be, I mean, it was very hard to believe that he would become president, but he just narrowly did. I mean, it was, you know, he lost the popular vote. And the American system has this strange thing called the Electoral College, which elected him by a tiny majority. The Electoral College, you know, was set up in order to protect the interests of the slave states, and it's still doing it.
Well, let's go back to the reality of your books and your thinking. You were talking, you used the expression, we're in a wounded happiness. Maybe this tells us something about your state of health, but maybe also about these kind of troubled times we're living in.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's a happy, I mean, one of the things I try to write about is the problem of happiness in an unhappy time, you know, because personally, my life, I mean, leaving aside the question of the attack, my life has been quite happy for quite a long time. But then you ask yourself, is that a kind of narcissism when all around you the world is so unhappy, when there's so much grounds, if you like, for unhappiness, 2 wars going on, enormous social divisions, a rising tide of anger on both sides, people turning towards violence more easily than in the recent past, etc. There are many reasons not to be happy, you know? And yet, if you find yourself fortunate enough to be happy, you know, the heart knows what it knows. So it is just about possible to be happy in an unhappy time.
One reason not to be happy, you're a New Yorker. You're certainly aware of what was going on at Columbia University in New York. There are 2 narratives, the Israeli one and the Palestinian one, and they seem to be totally incompatible. How come at a university?
Well, I do think that conflict of narratives has been going on for quite a long time. You know, what's happened is the arrival of a large amount of death in the bombing of Gaza, the death of by innocent civilians. I think that's what's driving the protests. That's the change, you know. Like that's the and you know, I can have some sympathy with that, because who wants to see innocent civilians, and especially children, being bombed to death? You know, nobody wants to see that. What I worry about with some, not all of the protesters, is the way in which the subject of Hamas never gets mentioned. You know, and sometimes in some university campuses, there's actually open support for Hamas. And it seems very strange for progressive young people to support a terrorist organization, which would destroy them, by the way. You know, so it's very difficult to. There's complications here, and we live in an age where nobody wants complication. You know, everything is black and white. So if you can't be 1,000% supportive of the students, then you are complicit in genocide. You know, and if you oppose anti-Semitism, then it proves that you are totally on the side of the Israeli government. Now, as it happens, I have been a supporter of a 2-state solution in the Middle East for as long as I can remember, since the 1980s. You know, the problem now is that neither side, neither the Netanyahu government nor the Hamas leadership, wants a 2-state solution. So how do you get it when neither side wants it? So the problem has become very hard to solve.
And even among writers, there is an argument going on. Pan America, founded by you, if that's correct.
No, but the festival was founded by me.
The festival
Pan
Voices.
America is much older.
Right. Even among Pan America, the writers are struggling with that issue.
Yeah, there's the divisions in American society, nobody escapes them now. Even writers' organizations find themselves falling victim to this gulf, where nobody's listening to anybody. Everybody is right. Everybody is determined to prove that they're right, and everyone else is wrong. And that's a very bad way to be. It means that discourse becomes impossible. And organizations like PEN exist in order to promote discourse between people of different points of view. That's one of the reasons why the organization exists. So it's very sad, I think.
Now, you certainly know a lot about fundamentalism, about censorship, at least since 1989, the fatwa. But now, is this a new kind of censorship movement, a new kind of fundamentalism in this environment of social media and rising temperature and volume, as you say?
Well, I think there's pressure to prevent certain kinds of speech coming from not just from one side of the political spectrum, but from all sides of the spectrum. And that's something new, I think. I think there's a generation growing up in America, I can't speak so expertly about anywhere else, for whom ideas of social justice, as they would define it, have become more important than free expression. So in the name of what they would believe to be social justice, they are prepared to restrict certain kinds of speech. And very odd, I think, to have a pressure for censorship coming from the left, because historically that has not happened. And I try to argue that that's a slippery slope, because censorship has always been used by the powerful against the powerless. And if you try to use censorship theoretically to defend the powerless, that's a dangerous position.
It can turn.
It can turn very easily. Also, you have still in America the right wing trying to ban books from libraries and so on. Very difficult to object to that if you yourself are trying to ban other kinds of speech, because you weaken your own case. So yeah, it's a hard time for free expression.
Yes, and still you're a fighter for free speech in a difficult environment. Isn't that a hard job?
Well, yeah, it is hard. Look, mostly I stay home and write stories. The free speech issue is something which, there are still many writers and intellectuals willing to fight that fight. I'm not alone. But it just seems to me sometimes that this was an argument we thought we had won. We didn't think we had to fight this argument because we already had an agreement that was a virtue, free expression. It now seems like we have to fight the argument all over again.
Well, but you got a weapon. Knife is the title of your book, and knife is also a metaphor maybe for the tool you use, the weapon of language, yes. The weapon of the fortress of words. But how can you use that efficiently in a time when people are not listening, are not fond of complexity, for example?
Well, somebody's listening because they're buying the book. So all you can do, nobody has a magic wand, and no one person can solve the problem. It happens over time and with the support and collaboration of a lot of people. So you do what you can, one does one's bit, and yes, writing this book is a part of that. It's a contribution, if you like, to that struggle. By myself, I can't solve anything, but in collaboration or together with other people, I hope that we can still succeed in this struggle.
You were also talking about an offense industry working and going on in your state, but also maybe here in Europe. What do you mean by an offense industry?
Well, you know, what's happened is the rise of a kind of identity politics, in which people almost define their identity by the things that offend them. You know, if nothing offends you, who are you? You're like nobody, unless you can claim that certain things offend you. So the offense industry is linked to this kind of identity politics. And I argued against it for a long time, but because I think one of the things that is happening in the world is that we are being asked to define ourselves very narrowly. You know, there's kind of, we can only be one thing. You know, we could be Jewish, or we could be gay, or we could be Muslim, or we could, you know, but one thing at a time. Whereas actually, one of the things that the art of the novel knows is that human beings aren't like that.
There's a broader range.
Human beings are many things at the same time. You know, and the way that you are with your children is not the way that you are with your employer, you know, or the way that you are with your friends in the bar. You know, so we are all multiple selves. You know, and the novel knows this, because that's the only way of writing an interesting character, is to give them that kind of plural self. And so the art of the novel is opposed to this idea of narrow definition. You know, and so it becomes actually quite a valuable tool to show people the complexity of human nature. You know, and that's the only way of getting out of this jam. You know, we have to understand that we are many different kinds of people. That, you know, you and I may have very different politics, but at the same time, maybe we support the same football team. You know, and once you start defining yourself in these many ways, it's easier to find common ground. You know, maybe we have different ideas about how we raise our children, but we have similar ideas about food. For example, so, you know, if you think of yourself as a collection of selves, it's easier to find things in common with other people, and that's a way of being civilized and peaceful. It's when you define yourself narrowly, it's much harder to find common ground with other people, and that makes conflict possible.
Sure. So literature is one answer. Another could be enlightenment. We are celebrating the 300th birthday of Immanuel Kant, the master of enlightenment. You went to Hamburg a few days ago. You were there getting another award. And even in Hamburg, there was a demonstration, a pro-Palestinian demonstration, and somebody told with a sign, the caliphate is the solution. So is enlightenment over, even in good old Europe?
No, I mean, I think, look, I mean, I can't speak in detail about what happened in Hamburg, but my understanding is that there's actually, as well as that demonstration, there's quite a lot of collaboration between the different religious faiths in Hamburg, a lot of interaction between Christian and Muslim and Jewish communities. So I think it's, you know, that's an optimistic thing if that's happening.
Well, you're an optimist. You are even infected with optimism, you sometimes say. What is the source of your optimism after all what happened in the world and to you personally?
Well, you know, it's very simple, that the world is not only darkness. You know, I mean, that's what gets on the news.
Right.
You know, but the world is not like that. The world is full of beauty. The world is full of people that one loves, you know, and you get strength from, and that's where you get it from. You get it from seeing the best of human nature, not just the worst. And actually, even at that moment of the attack, the reason I'm sitting here talking to you is that the audience came up to save my life. You know, people ran up out of the audience
at the surgeons,
at the attacker, and restrained him. You know, and if that had not happened, I wouldn't be here. You know, so I say somewhere in the book that it's as if the worst of human nature, which is bigotry, fanaticism, violence, and the best of human nature, which is selflessness and courage and so on, I was being shown both sides simultaneously. You know, and fortunately, the good guys won.
Okay, an optimistic view at the end. The writers own the future is another of your sentences. How would you explain that?
Well, I mean, look, it's because empires rise and fall, you know, leaders come and go. Writing remains, you know. I mean, you could just use, for example, if we talk about Napoleon Bonaparte's Russian campaign of 1812, we immediately think about War and Peace. And Tolstoy, in a way, kind of owns that, you know. Even though War and Peace was written 50 years after, you know, it still becomes the most powerful description of that event. And that's just one example. It's just that, you know, writers are the ones who tell us the story of the human race. You know, and they tell us who we've been, how we got here from there, and who we are now. You know, and that's the power of literature. It has no, I don't believe that literature creates revolutions. You know, I think you want to be careful of not overclaiming. There are things that books can't do, you know, but there are things that they can do, which is that they can do that. They can tell us who we are, and they can do that in a way that lasts beyond this or that powerful entity. You know, I mean, I use in the book some of the historical examples, like, for example, you know, Garcia Lorca was killed by the killers of the Falange, of the Spanish fascist party. But the Falange is gone, you know, and Garcia Lorca is still here. You know.
Well, this is your 22nd book, Knife. This is maybe a book written out of necessity. Maybe this is an exception. Are you becoming again a novelist, as we know you, in full power of your imagination?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I don't know what the next book is, but I hope so. But, you know, it's actually, in one way, it's not that different from the other books, because I've always said to students, for example, only write the books that you can't avoid writing. You know, if you can find a way to avoid writing a book, don't write it. We don't need it. You know, that all books, whether they're fiction or non-fiction, whether they're autobiographical or totally imagined, they should feel necessary to the writer to write. You know, and those are the books I've always tried to write, the books that feel necessary to me. You know, and so in that sense, this is not different. The reason it's necessary is different. You know, but I think all my books, I would say, are books that I wrote out of a kind of necessity, kind of artistic necessity.
Mr. Rushdie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.